Back recording.
Mr. Nelson, go ahead and call your first witness.
Okay. I'd like to call Mr. Kevin Kachansky.
Raise your right hand, sir. Do you solemnly swear or affirm the testimony you're about to give in this matter is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Thank you.
And Mr. Kachansky, briefly, could you provide your educational and employment background to the board?
I graduated from Temple in 2000 with a Bachelor of Science in Landscape Architecture. I've been employed in municipal planning and zoning since that time. I've been here at Radnor Township since 2011 as the Director of Community Development and Zoning Officer.
And is ordinance enforcement one of your duties as the Director of Community Development?
Yes, it is.
And does that include enforcing the Radnor rental housing code?
Yes, it does.
And is that how you became involved with 712 Brook Street?
Yes.
I'm going to hand to you, Mr. Kachansky, a document I'd like to have marked as Exhibit T4. Yes, correct, T14. Do you recognize that document, sir?
Yes, I do.
And could you please describe that document for the board?
This was a letter that I drafted August 16, 2016. It was a lease request to Ms. Rolnick and William Sidney's, requesting copies of all rental agreements for the properties that they owned in Radnor Township, and setting forth a time frame to provide those in accordance with the ordinance.
And did you receive the leases from Ms. Rolnick in compliance with this letter?
I did not.
And what did you do, if anything, when you did not receive the leases in a timely manner?
In early September, I then followed up with a letter to Ms. Rolnick advising her that she had not been responsive to my lease request and issued the property a formal warning, which is the first level of enforcement under the rental housing code.
Mr. Kachansky, I just handed you a document asking to have marked as Exhibit T15. Is this the formal warning you just described?
Yes, it is, dated September 1st, 2016. It's a letter that I drafted, again advising Ms. Rolnick due to her failure to comply with my previous request that the property at 712 Brook Street was placed in formal warning.
Did you ever get a lease for 712 Brook Street in response to your letter that's Exhibit T14?
I did. A few days later, Ms. Rolnick did respond with a letter and copies of leases for the subject properties.
And is that lease the lease that's been marked as Exhibit T2?
Yes, it is the letter with the leases.
Mr. Nelson, just to make it clear, your T2 has that lease attached to it.
Correct, yes.
It was also, and that is the same lease that was presented as A1, correct, Mr. Carroll? Yes.
Yes.
Minus the cover letter. Minus the cover letter,
Right.
understood.
And that's the only lease the township received in regards to 712 Brook Street?
Yes. At that period of time, yes.
After the issuance of the formal warning, what, if anything, did you do or steps you took concerning 712 Brook Street?
I did some due diligence, visited the property based off the history that we've had with this property and with this landlord of violating our codes. Observed an out-of-state vehicle parked out front. So that was obviously one of the indicators that we typically see for student rentals, out-of-state license plates, and proceeded then our investigation into the status of the tenants.
And what, if anything, did that investigation find?
Unfortunately, it didn't yield any results. The universities at the time that we were checking with and coordinating with, Villanova, Cabrini, and Eastern, all reported back that they were not enrolled in either of those institutions.
Did you check with any other institutions in the area?
I did not.
So did you ever check with Bryn Mawr College?
I did not.
So did anything further happen in regards to your investigation of this property?
At that point, we just continued to monitor it for Again, out-of-state license plates on vehicles that were parked out front, but at that point, nothing further.
When did you first discover that the renters of this property were students at Bryn Mawr College?
It was in late November, early December of, I believe it was late November of 2017, when we had then received a lease application for this property to rent it. The lease application came via our police department for the tenant, Margaret Arico, trying to apply for a parking permit. Knowing that the property was under suspension, that raised the first flag, and then coordinating with your office on this property and the actions that we were going to take, it came to light that there was other information that was presented to your office that indicated that they were students in this property.
And so do you review the two leases, both the one provided to you by Ms. Rolnick as well as the second lease with Mr. Ross on it? That's exhibit T7.
I did review those.
Did you review the two credit rental applications that have been marked as exhibits T9 and T10?
Yes, I did.
Did you review the various emails from Mr. Stromberg that have been marked exhibit T8, T11, and T12?
Yes, I did.
And what conclusions, if any, did you draw from your review of these documents?
Just a simple review of those documents. There was enough indications on there from the tenants themselves that they were enrolled full-time as graduate students at Bryn Mawr College.
And I'm going to hand to you a document I'd like to have marked as exhibit T16. Could you please explain to the board what this document is?
This is from our zoning code. It is Article 1, the definitions and word usage, and contains definitions that would be applicable in this situation: a family, student, and student home.
Okay. And looking at the definition of a student, is there anything to distinguish between undergraduate or graduate students under that definition?
There is not. In fact, it specifically states in the last sentence, the term student shall apply to both undergraduate and graduate students alike.
And is there a credit hour limit or minimum that needs to be met in order to meet the definition of a student?
Taking at least 6 credit hours.
And the definition of a student home, what does that mean?
Student home is it's a living arrangement for a maximum of 2 students, as defined in this chapter, and it is handled separately under our rental housing ordinance and rented and licensed separately than a regular rental.
So if you are renting to students, what does that mean as far as the rental housing code and licensing?
It is a separate approval process. A student home also applies to any combination of graduate students, undergraduate students, and or trade school students living in the same dwelling unit. So there's a separate approval. A regular rental license is approved after a occupancy inspection. A student home has to go through our zoning hearing board and obtain a special exception because there are certain requirements and setbacks from other student homes that the code outlines.
It is or was a 712 Brook Street ever approved to be a student home?
No, I'm not aware of any applications that were submitted by Ms. Rolnick or any other previous owners to apply for that designation.
And so it wasn't a student home for the 2016-2017 rental period?
No, it was not.
How many, under the rental housing code, how many tenants can a apartment be rented to, or rental unit be rented to?
A regular rental unit?
Correct.
Regular rental unit can be rented to a family and one other unrelated individual. And a family consists of those that are related by blood, marriage, or otherwise by law.
Okay. So if there is no family relationship between the various tenants, how many tenants can rent a regular rental unit.
2.
Is that also for students and student homes?
Students, the limitation is no more than 2 students.
So, in this particular instance, based on your investigation, did Ms. Rolnick, did you find that that Ms. Rolnick was improperly renting 712 Brook Street to students?
I did, based off of the information from the tenants themselves, that there were 3 tenants living in the unit, that violated, and they were admitting that they were students. Not only violated the definition of family, but also the definition of student, even though the property wasn't a student rental.
And did that provide a basis for the issuance of the suspension notice that has been marked as Exhibit A3?
It did. That was one of the bases for the suspension.
And the other basis of the suspension?
That, as we previously stated, that the property, that we had entered into an agreement with the property owner regarding previous violations on this site for illegally renting to students, that there was a 6-month suspension based off of information provided by Ms. Rolnick's attorney, that suspension had started June 1st, and when you count 6 months, November 1st would have been in violation of those provisions.
And did the township ever receive any other notification from Ms. Rolnick or her representatives that the 6-month suspension was starting earlier than June 1st?
We did not.
Upon reviewing Exhibit T13, the NT12, the payment schedule provided by Mr. Stromberg, do you believe that the suspension period started May 1st?
I would have no way of indicating that. It would appear that they had paid, rent is due the 1st of the month per the lease. It looks like that they were making payments ahead of time. So if you go by the schedule of the rental payments to Ms. Rolnick, that they were before the month. So the rental payment of $17.25 on April 21st would have been for the month of May.
And when a rental license or is suspended, does that only apply to the occupancy of the apartment, or does it also apply to receiving rent for that apartment, or both?
The unit cannot be rented at that point in time.
So no rent may be received despite it not being occupied?
It would still be, if the lease goes through the end of the month, it's still under lease for that month, it's still being considered rented. There's an active lease.
Just give me 1 second, please. Did Ms. Rolnick receive a rental license for the 2017-2018 rental period?
She has not. Ms. Rolnick had attempted, well, she had reached out to the township to inquire why she did not receive her renewal notice. In 2 emails, Ms. Rolnick also came and visited me at the township and specifically asked where the rental renewal was. I informed Ms. Rolnick that the property at that point in time was currently under suspension, that she was represented by an attorney, and so was the township, and to have her attorney contact the township solicitor's office.
But no license was ever officially applied for or issued for that rental period?
During the summer of 2017, no. After I issued my suspension notice, I believe it was November 1st, then Ms. Rolnick, then on November 3rd, subsequently sent a rental application in which I prepared correspondence and let Ms. Rolnick know that the property was suspended for a specific period of time, and that we would not be, not only was suspended, but we were subjecting it to a non-renewal provision of the code, and that we would not be accepting the rental application at this point in time, at which point it was returned to her.
And you have no idea when Stromberg and his roommates actually vacated 712 Brook Street?
No notification of the unit being vacated was ever provided by Ms. Rolnick. The first indication that we received that suspension had started was from the letter from Mr. Carroll.
Is ignorance of whether or not a tenant is a student a valid defense as to illegally renting to a student?
In accordance with the rental housing code, it is not.
Thank you. That is all.
Do you rest?
Yes. Township does rest. Township has to move all exhibits.
Any cross?
I just have a couple of questions, Mr. Kachansky. Thank you. You said you went to the 712 Brook Street property in September to examine the cars that were either in the driveway or out front of the house. Is that correct?
I believe so, yes.
Okay. And then you took the license. You noticed out-of-state license plates. Took those license plates down, and they made inquiries to Villanova, Cabrini, and I believe you said Eastern University.
Correct.
Okay. But you did not make an inquiry to Bryn Mawr College at that time.
I did not.
Okay. And then you then placed your investigation in the 712 Brook on hold for a couple months, is that correct?
It was not on hold. We continued to monitor the property.
And how did you monitor the property for the remainder of September and October?
We have other student rentals in that area, so during the course of routine inspections, drive down the street and make observations.
And did you make any observations in September, October of 2017 that would indicate that there were students in that 712 Brook Street property?
September, October of 2017.
I'm sorry, yes, of 17, yes.
17, at that point in time, September, October, no. Because at that point, we had received correspondence from your office that the property was under suspension. So there was nothing that would indicate that the unit was occupied in September or October of 2017.
You said the first indication you got that there was something amiss was when the Radnor Township Police Department came to you that that the tenant, Miss Arico, attempted to apply for a permit?
Correct.
And then you reopened your investigation in 712?
Yes.
Okay. And when did the Radnor PD come in to you and give you that notification?
When the lease was submitted as is required to obtain a parking permit, that lease was forwarded to me at that point in time. That was, I want to say, late October, early November, in and around the 1st of November.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Kachansky. I don't have anything further.
Any other?
Nothing further. Like I said, just a wish to move my exhibits into the record.
We'll make them all part of the record. Mr. Carroll, anything else?
No.
Okay. Sir, are you here to speak on behalf of this application?
No, just observing.
Okay. Yeah, because normally we'd open this up to the public. Since there's no one else here from the public that wants to speak, we can close that portion of the meeting. In fact, we'll recess so the board can deliberate and we'll come back with a decision.
Okay.
Thank you.